Victoria and Albert, a royal love story that shaped an empire. Did you know that one of the most powerful love stories in royal history began not in romance but in duty? The story of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert is not just about affection between two people. It is the story of how love shaped a monarchy and influenced an entire era. Their bond transformed how the world viewed royalty itself. It began in the grand halls of European palaces, where politics often disguised itself as marriage. Let's float back to the year 1819. The British Empire stood proud yet uncertain. King George III's long reign was coming to its quiet end. The throne had no clear heir. In that same year, two royal babies were born. One was a girl named Alexandrina Victoria. The other, a boy named Francis Albert Augustus Charles Emmanuel. She was born in Kensington Palace, London. He was born in a small duchy called Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in Germany. They did not know it yet, but their lives were already set to intertwine. Victoria's childhood was lonely. Her father, the Duke of Kent, died when she was just 8 months old. Her mother, the Duchess of Kent, followed a strict upbringing plan known as the Kensington system. It controlled where Victoria went, whom she met, and what she learned. Every moment of her life was planned. Even her playtime was supervised. Yet deep inside, Victoria developed a strong will. She learned early that if she wanted to survive among royal politics, she needed to be firm. Across the sea, Albert grew up in a world of discipline and education. His uncle, Leopold, guided him carefully. Leopold was a man with great ambitions. He had once been married to Princess Charlotte, the only legitimate child of King George IV. When Charlotte died, Leopold's hopes of becoming a British prince vanished, but his eyes turned toward his nephews and nieces. He saw a new chance for influence through young Victoria. By the time Victoria turned 17, she was the heir to the throne. The aging King William IV had no surviving children. Leopold began to weave his plans. He encouraged his nephew Albert to visit England. He wrote letters to Victoria, gently mentioning Albert's qualities, his intelligence, his kindness, his love for the arts. The first meeting took place in 1836 at Kensington Palace. Victoria later wrote in her diary that Albert was extremely handsome and had a most pleasing countenance. But duty called her attention elsewhere. Marriage was not yet in her thoughts. In 1837, the old king died. The young princess became Queen Victoria at just 18 years old. Crowds filled the streets to see the small, serious girl step onto the throne. The monarchy had suffered from scandal and ridicule under her uncles. Now the people hoped for a fresh start. Victoria promised herself that she would rule with dignity and moral strength. Yet even queens need companionship. Let's float over to 1839. 2 years had passed since her coronation. The new queen had already shown her independence. She worked closely with her Prime Minister Lord Melbourne, who became her trusted mentor and friend. But Melbourne was nearly 40 years older. The public whispered that the young queen was too attached to him. Pressure grew for her to marry and secure the line of succession. Once again, Leopold saw his chance. He arranged for Albert and his brother Ernest to visit Windsor Castle. Victoria greeted them with excitement. The moment Albert entered the room, something shifted. He had matured into a calm and graceful man. His gentle eyes and sincere manner touched her heart. Later that day, Victoria confided to her diary that Albert was perfection. Days passed, filled with music, walks, and long talks in the gardens of Windsor. Albert showed none of the arrogance common among princes. He listened carefully when Victoria spoke. He matched her energy yet softened her fiery temper. When the visit ended, Victoria could not hide her emotions. Royal custom dictated that only the queen could propose. So on October 15, 1839, she called Albert to her private room. Her voice trembled as she told him she wished to marry him. Albert accepted with deep affection. He kissed her hand. For a moment, the queen who ruled millions felt like an ordinary woman in love. The engagement brought joy to Victoria's heart, though not all shared her enthusiasm. Some ministers feared Albert would interfere in government affairs. Others saw him as a foreign outsider. But Victoria defended him fiercely. She wrote, "I am so happy that I cannot say the feeling of contentment and happiness pervades my whole being." Their wedding took place on February 10, 1840, in the Chapel Royal of St. James's Palace. The morning was cold and gray, but the queen shone in a white satin gown trimmed with orange blossoms. It was a choice that would set a trend for generations. Albert wore a uniform of a British field marshal. The crowd cheered as their carriage rolled through London. For the first time in many years, the people felt pride in their monarchy. That day marked more than a marriage. It marked the beginning of a partnership that would define Victorian Britain. The young couple settled into Buckingham Palace, which was then still half-finished and uncomfortable. Yet Victoria was radiant. She called Albert "my angel." He, in turn, became her confidant and advisor. Together they dreamed of a family filled with warmth and discipline. Let's drift gently into their early married life. The first years were full of affection and discovery. They played piano duets in the evenings and painted together. Victoria, who had once lived under strict control, found joy in the freedom of love. Yet life at court was not all harmony. Ministers still distrusted Albert. The Queen's household resisted his influence. Even Parliament debated whether he should be given a royal allowance. Albert kept his patience. He studied British politics and learned how to serve without overstepping. Behind closed doors, the marriage deepened. Victoria relied on Albert for advice, and he became the calm center of her emotional storms. When their first child, Princess Victoria, was born in November 1840, the Queen's heart overflowed. She wrote, "It was the happiest day of my life." But happiness and responsibility often collided. Albert wanted to be more than a husband. He wanted to contribute to the nation. Many did not understand his vision yet. And as the 1840s unfolded, the pressures of the throne began to test their union. Let's drift into the next chapter of their story. The year was 1841. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had now settled into married life, yet their world was far from peaceful. The British Empire was vast and restless. New technologies were emerging. Old systems were breaking apart. Within the palace walls, Albert searched for his true place beside the Queen. Though Victoria adored him, she was still learning what it meant to share power. From her first days on the throne, she had ruled with confidence. She signed papers. She met ministers. She shaped the image of a young and determined monarch. Now she had a husband who wanted to help, not to rule, but to guide with logic and calm thought. At first, it was difficult for her to let go of control. Their arguments, though private, were often intense. Victoria's fiery nature met Albert's quiet discipline. But over time, love softened those sharp edges. Albert became the steady heart of her life. He woke early, studied reports, and filled pages with ideas for social improvement. He was fascinated by science and technology. He believed Britain's future depended not on war, but on progress and education. Slowly, Victoria began to see how his mind could strengthen her reign. Their family grew quickly. Between 1840 and 1857, Victoria gave birth to 9 children. Each arrival was greeted with both joy and exhaustion. The Queen loved her babies, but disliked the physical strain of pregnancy. Albert cared for her tenderly through each one. When she recovered, he encouraged her to return to her duties, always reminding her that their work as monarchs was a sacred trust. Let's float over to one of Albert's greatest dreams, the idea of a modern, enlightened Britain. He saw industry not as a cold machine, but as a symbol of human creativity. In 1851, he took the bold step of organizing the Great Exhibition in Hyde Park. It would be the first international showcase of invention, science, and art. The Crystal Palace, a vast structure of glass and iron, rose like a vision of the future. At first, many mocked the idea. Politicians doubted its success. Critics sneered that a foreign prince was leading the project. But Albert pressed forward. He studied every design, approved every detail, and insisted that the exhibition should celebrate not just wealth, but human achievement. When it opened, millions came to see it. Queen Victoria walked proudly by his side as the crowd cheered. The Great Exhibition became a triumph. It showed the world that the British Empire was not only powerful, but creative and forward-looking. In her journal, Victoria wrote, "My dearest Albert's name will be immortalized by this noble undertaking." For once, the people who had doubted him began to admire him. His calm influence brought dignity to the crown. His ideas for education and art inspired a new spirit across the nation. But even as the world celebrated, shadows began to creep into their happiness. Albert was often overworked. He suffered from fatigue and illness. The burden of managing the royal estates, advising on political affairs, and supporting Victoria took a quiet toll. Yet, he rarely complained. His devotion to duty remained unbroken. Victoria's love for him deepened with every passing year. She depended on him not just as a husband, but as the anchor of her life. When political crises arose, she turned to him first. When ministers clashed, she asked for his judgment. Their letters to each other reveal a tenderness that ran far beyond royal formality. She called him my dearest angel. He wrote back calling her my own beloved little wife. Let's move now to their private moments away from London. The royal couple often escaped to Osborne House on the Isle of Wight. It was their seaside refuge, a place where the strict protocols of court life melted away. There they painted, rode horses, and played with their children. Albert designed much of the estate himself. He added terraces that overlooked the sea and filled the rooms with warmth and light. Victoria loved to walk along the beach at sunset, holding his hand. She called those moments her heaven on earth. But peace never lasted long for a ruling monarch. Political storms returned again and again. In 1848, revolutions swept across Europe. Monarchs were overthrown, cities were in flames, and republics rose and fell overnight. Britain remained stable, but fear spread through the palace. The royal couple watched from afar as crowns tumbled and kings fled. Albert believed the best way to protect the British throne was to stay close to the people. He encouraged reforms in education, housing, and industry to ease the struggles of the poor. His ideas were ahead of their time. Some ministers resisted him, seeing him as too idealistic. Yet Victoria stood beside him. She began to use her influence to promote the same causes. The queen who once ruled by instinct now ruled with intellect, shaped by her husband's wisdom. Their bond grew even stronger in those middle years. They were no longer just lovers. They were partners in governance and vision. Still, beneath their success, small cracks began to appear. Albert's health weakened. He suffered from stomach pain and constant fatigue. Victoria noticed but refused to imagine a life without him. Let's drift to 1857. Their youngest child, Princess Beatrice, had just been born. The queen was overjoyed, yet Albert looked weary. He smiled for her sake, but behind the smiles was a shadow of exhaustion. As the years passed, he worked harder than ever, trying to guide his growing sons, calm his emotional wife, and serve the state. He often said that his mission was not only to improve the monarchy, but to prepare it for the future. He wanted their children to understand duty, modesty, and service. He personally oversaw their education. The older ones sometimes found him strict, yet they respected his calm authority. Victoria trusted him completely with family matters. She wrote that her happiness and peace rested entirely on his shoulders. As the 1860s approached, a quiet sense of change filled the air. The world outside was shifting once again. Industry was advancing faster than ever. The empire stretched across continents. But inside Buckingham Palace, one heart that had held the royal family together was beginning to fade. Let's float now toward that gentle, tragic turn. It began with small illnesses that Albert brushed aside. He told Victoria not to worry. Yet the pain grew sharper and fatigue became constant. He continued to work, even when his body begged for rest. His last great act of duty came during a family crisis involving their eldest son, the Prince of Wales. Albert's heart was full of worry for his boy, who had shown more interest in parties than in responsibility. He traveled to see him despite his illness, determined to guide him one last time. The journey weakened him further. When he returned to Windsor, he collapsed into bed, shivering with fever. Victoria refused to believe it was serious. She sat by his bedside, holding his hand as doctors came and went. But the man who had been her strength for 2 decades was slipping away. As winter settled over England, so too did sorrow begin to settle over the royal home. The love that had once lifted an empire was about to face its darkest hour. Let's drift gently into the final chapter of their story. The year was 1861. Windsor Castle stood quiet under the cold December sky. Within its walls, the Queen of the British Empire kept vigil beside the bed of the man she loved more than life itself. Prince Albert lay pale and weak. He had caught what doctors called typhoid fever. In truth, his body was exhausted from years of overwork and worry. For days, Victoria refused to leave his side. She read to him. She smoothed his hair. She whispered prayers under her breath. The palace felt frozen in time. Outside, ministers continued their duties, servants moved in silence, and the royal children waited in fear. Inside that room, everything centered around one fragile life. Albert spoke softly to her, urging her to stay strong. He told her to think of the children, to rule wisely, and to trust in God. Even in pain, his thoughts were not of himself, but of his duty. Victoria wrote later that he seemed almost angelic in those final hours. On the evening of December 14, 1861, as the wind swept over Windsor, Albert took his last breath. He was only 42. For a moment, the great empire stood still. The queen, who had once glowed with life and love, was broken. She cried out, "My life as I know it is over." From that day forward, Victoria's world changed. The light that had guided her vanished. She dressed in black and withdrew from public life. The halls of Buckingham Palace grew dark and silent. Ministers begged her to appear in public, but she could not bear the thought. She moved to Windsor and Osborne House, surrounding herself with memories of him. She kept his room exactly as it was. His clothes remained in the wardrobe. His watch stayed by the bedside. Every morning, servants placed hot water for his shave, as if he were still there. Let's float through those years of mourning. The people of Britain admired her devotion, but soon grew uneasy. The monarchy seemed absent. Parliament worked, but the Queen's presence had always been a symbol of stability. Newspapers began to call her the Widow of Windsor. Still, she refused to return fully to public life. Her letters from those years revealed deep sorrow, yet also quiet strength. She wrote that Albert was not gone but watching over her. Their love had transformed her once, and even in death, it continued to shape her. Guided by his memory, she began to see new purpose in her solitude. She focused on the future of her children and grandchildren. The royal family that Albert had nurtured with discipline and vision now spread across Europe. His bloodline would soon run through the houses of Germany, Russia, Spain, and beyond. One by one, their children married into foreign courts. The world would later call Victoria the grandmother of Europe. Her descendants would sit on thrones across the continent. Yet she never stopped writing letters to them, filled with advice and affection. Each one carried the tone of both a mother and a monarch. Let's pause for a moment on the legacy they built together. Before Albert, the British monarchy had drifted far from the hearts of its people. Scandal and excess had tarnished its name. But through their love, Victoria and Albert changed that image. They made family life royal again. They made virtue and stability the new symbols of power. Their partnership gave the crown a moral foundation that endured long after they were gone. Albert's vision of progress lived on too. The Great Exhibition had been his masterpiece, but it also set a model for future generations. Science, art, and education flourished under his influence. Institutions he supported grew into museums and academies that still exist today. His dream of a thoughtful and educated Britain became part of the national identity. As Victoria grew older, she found comfort in honoring him through these creations. Statues of Albert rose across the land. The Grand Albert Memorial in London stood as a tribute to his genius and his goodness. Each time she looked upon it, she felt his presence near. In her later years, she finally began to appear in public again. The love she had once hidden in private now became the foundation of her public image. When she rode in her golden carriage through cheering crowds, she no longer seemed the lonely girl of Kensington or the grieving widow of Windsor. She was a queen transformed by love and loss. She had lived through revolutions, wars, and industrial change, yet her faith and duty never broke. Let's drift toward her final years. Time softened her grief, but she never stopped wearing black. She continued to write about Albert in her journals until the end of her life. She ruled for 63 years, longer than any British monarch before her. When she finally passed away in January 1901, her last wish was simple and heartfelt. She asked to be buried beside Albert, not as a queen beside a prince, but as a wife beside her beloved husband. In the royal mausoleum at Frogmore, their tombs rest side by side. The carvings show them lying hand in hand, just as they had done in life. The marble figures capture the calm and devotion that defined their union, and so their story comes full circle. From two distant cousins shaped by duty to a couple who built the moral heart of an empire. Their love survived politics, pressure, and loss. It shaped a century and redefined what it meant to rule with humanity. Even now, more than 100 years later, their legacy lingers in every portrait, every palace, and every royal family across Europe. The world remembers Queen Victoria as the symbol of an age. But behind that crown stood the quiet strength of Prince Albert, the man who taught her that power means little without love, and love means everything when shared in truth.